Hi, my name is Jen Bulava. I'm a naturalist with the Burlington County Park System. Today we're going to take a close look at the butterfly garden at Smith's Woods. Smith's Woods is the section of Smithville Park that's accessed off East Railroad Avenue in East Hampton. So the purpose of the butterfly garden here is to provide food for all of the butterflies and the different other pollinators that are here in all parts of their life cycle. So we have planted all different kinds of flowering plants that will benefit butterflies and other pollinators that feed on nectar and also the plants that they need for their caterpillars. So we're going to take a close look at all of these different kinds of plants in the butterfly garden that we have planted to attract different kinds of pollinators. The other purpose of the butterfly garden is to educate the public about how they can help pollinators by planting similar things in their garden. So first we're going to take a look at some examples of flowers that attract butterflies. So we have quite a few different varieties of milkweed in the butterfly garden. What we're looking at here is something called butterfly weed, which is an orange colored milkweed. And this particular milkweed, as you can see, has this structure which has clusters of flowers grouped together. They have a small tube surrounded by various petals around them. And this particular structure very much attracts butterflies. It has a small tube with a rim for them to land on. And that's what butterflies like as far as the structure of a flower. It's also a very bright color. You know, color plays a really big part in which pollinators are attracted to which different kinds of flowers. Orange is a pretty unusual color in wildflowers in nature. So orange is really only going to be attractive to butterflies and possibly hummingbirds. But there's not a lot of other things that can see orange. So this one is very much advertising to butterflies specifically by the color and the structure of the flowers. We can also take a look at common milkweed and compare and see how similar the flowers are, just slightly different arrangement and a different color. Now we're going to take a look at the common milkweed. Now the common milkweed was actually growing here before we even had the butterfly garden, so we kind of made the garden around it. Common milkweed is one of the most important plants in this garden for pollinators in general. If we take a look at the structure, it's got the same kind of tube with the rim that we saw on the butterfly milkweed, but the common milkweed, you can see, is a very different color. It's this pale pink. And pale pink and white and yellow are the three pastel colors that attract the largest variety of insect pollinators. That has to do with their color vision. So this color is much more attractive to a wider variety of pollinators. So we have butterflies certainly that are attracted to this flower, but we also have a wide variety of bees, wasps, moths, beetles, etc. that come to feed on this flower, mainly due to the color and the scent. Okay, there is a soldier beetle on this milkweed. This is a beneficial pollinator in that not only do they pollinate flowers and help them reproduce, but they also, in the larval part of their life cycle, they eat a lot of pests underground. So these are doubly beneficial as both predators and pollinators. So these are really good insects to have around. They're called soldier beetles, and they are very much attracted to pale pink and white flowers here in the butterfly garden. So this is the common milkweed flower, and the leaves of common milkweed are wide and thick. You can see it has like a very noticeable white vein. This looks very different from our orange butterfly weed. In addition to this being a really important plant for all different kinds of pollinators, for the nectar it provides, it's also what we call a host plant, which is the plant that the butterfly lays its eggs on for the caterpillars to eat when they hatch. And so monarchs require milkweed in order to lay their eggs on, and that's what the caterpillars are going to eat when they hatch. So if we didn't have the milkweed here, we wouldn't have monarchs. We'll watch as the days go by, and we'll look for eggs on the underside of the leaves, which will turn into black, yellow, and white striped caterpillars that will feed on the milkweed leaves. You know, and the amazing thing is that milkweed has toxic sap inside, so there's very few insects that can actually feed on that without being poisoned. But the monarch caterpillar is immune to that. It builds up the toxin, and that's what makes it unpalatable to anything that tries to eat it for the rest of its life, including when it's an adult. And that's why there's such bright, bright colors, because it's a warning, don't eat me, I'm poisonous. And the reason why they're poisonous is because they eat the toxic sap in milkweed. So it's all very important in understanding the life cycle of the monarch. So this beautiful purple flower here is a type of bergamot. It's in the Monarda genus. It's related to the bee balms, but usually the bee balms are a redder color, and this bergamot is a more purple color. And if we look very carefully at the flower structure, we see that it's a very long skinny tube with a lower lip. And what this is saying is it's attracting something that has a long tongue and wants to land, which is a butterfly for the most part, or a moth in this area, right? So this flower is definitely, the structure and the color is attracting butterflies primarily to the nectar that's in that long tube. There's also a few kinds of bees that have long tongues that could reach the nectar in these flowers. So this is a really neat particular type of flower in the mint family known as bergamot. So the pastel colors, white, yellow, and pale pink, are important to understand in a garden setting because those pastel colors are the ones that attract the widest variety of insect pollinators. Now, our insect pollinators can be bees, wasps, butterflies, moths, certain kinds of beetles, and certain kinds of flies. That's a lot of different potential insect pollinators. But a lot of them don't have good color vision. They're just going to see the pastel flower against a darker background. So white, yellow, and pale pink are going to be attractive to a wider array of insect pollinators. The other important thing to understand beyond color is the flower structure. So if we take a look at something that has an aster type flower, which is a central disc with rays around it, this generic pattern or structure is attractive to a very wide array of insects because they can land on it easily and feed on it easily. It doesn't require a certain kind of specialized mouth part to feed on. So anything that's in the aster family is going to be kind of a generic flower for many, many kinds of insect pollinators, not just butterflies. So here we see false sunflower, which has that central disc and lots of yellow rays around the outside. And so this would attract everything from butterflies and moths to bees and certain types of flies that are pollinators and even certain kinds of beetles. So we do like to encourage native plants in the butterfly garden. Some of these plants were already planted here before park staff kind of took on the role of moderating what's here. So the lamb's ear in this case was already here before I took over the management of the garden. But lamb's ear does attract certain kinds of pollinators, in particularly our native bumblebees, which need a lot of help right now. And we are seeing some of the common eastern bumblebees on the lamb's ear flowers. The flowers have a tube with a small rim, so they're attracting certain kinds of butterflies and bumblebees that have a longer tongue to get to the nectar in these particular purple flowers that are arranged in kind of spherical spikes at the top of the flower stem. Okay, so we have many, many kinds of mints in the butterfly garden, and they bloom at different times, which is important that we have staggered blooming times so that there's nectar throughout the entire season for the insects to feed on. This one that we're going to look at here is called catmint. It has purple flowers. They're relatively small and arranged in tall spikes, similar to lavender. And this particular type of color and flower structure is attractive to many kinds of butterflies, as well as bees and small flies that mimic bees. So you can get quite a variety of insects attracted to this. It has a really nice scent, and it is deer resistant. So the next nectar plant that we're going to talk about is called foxglove beard tongue. This is a kind of penstemon which has a really beautiful flower that can be white or lavender depending on the variety. And the flower tube, you can see, has a very long tube where the nectar is held at the back. And then these petals here are arranged as a landing pad for the butterfly, moth, or bumblebee. It has to be one of those that has a long tongue to reach the back of this flower tube. So this is an excellent choice of a native wildflower that you can put in a butterfly garden. So spiderwort is the next flower we're going to look at. It blooms May to June. It can be violet, purple, or sort of more towards the blue hues, but they have 3 petals and long, smooth leaves, almost like an iris. And they attract a wide variety of insect pollinators, from bees and butterflies to flies and moths. We have black-eyed Susan and purple coneflower planted throughout most of the beds in the butterfly garden. These are really important nectar plants, and they're native. The black-eyed Susan has a brilliant yellow petals with a dark center. It attracts a wide variety of pollinators. And then the purple coneflower has a reddish center with brilliant bright pink petals that attracts mostly butterflies and bees. So the black-eyed Susan is identified right now by the extremely fuzzy leaves. They're sort of grayish green fuzzy leaves, and these are going to open at the end of June and they'll bloom through July. This is lance-leaf coreopsis, also sometimes known as lance-leaf tickseed. It's a native wildflower in the aster family, and you can see its bright yellow petals and a bright yellow center attract a really wide range of insect pollinators. It's great for bees and butterflies, and it has that wide open aster design so that lots of things can access that central disc where the nectar is. So this is a really neat shrub that we planted called buttonbush. And buttonbush is doubly beneficial here because it's both a nectar plant and a host plant. So the nectar is going to come from a really cool spherical white flower. Right now it's just in bud, but it will become a really brilliant white rounded flower, mostly in the month of July, and attracts a huge variety of butterflies. Now the plant itself, the leaves, are a host plant for many kinds of really interesting moths. There's a variety of sphinx moths and one type of silkworm moth called the regal moth that lay their eggs on this plant, and the caterpillars will eat the leaves. We've seen some really incredible examples of these really strange large daytime moths here in the garden. So we talked briefly about host plants with the common milkweed. Since common milkweed is the host plant for the monarch butterfly, we tried to incorporate host plants for other species of butterflies, because the purpose of this garden is not just to provide the nectar that they need as adults, but also the plants they need to eat as caterpillars. And that's what a host plant is. It's the plant that the adult lays her eggs on, and so that when the eggs hatch, the caterpillars are on the right plant. There's only certain kinds of plants that caterpillars can eat, depending on their species. So in the case of the black swallowtail, the family of plants that they eat is in the parsley or carrot family. So we have planted parsley, dill and fennel for the black swallowtail to lay her eggs on, and that's what this host plant section of this garden is for, black swallowtail caterpillars. So we can take a look at that. We also have some other host plants that we planted here as well. All right, so we have parsley and dill, again all for the black swallowtail caterpillars to feed on. The fennel is down this way, very feathery leaves there. That's the fennel. So throughout the summer you could check the host plant garden out and look for caterpillars in different parts of their life cycle. And just remember that anytime we plant herbs, it's for them to be eaten. It's not for us. And if the plants get eaten, that's the point. So a lot of people plant these things and they are frustrated that they're eaten by caterpillars. But if you plant them for the specific purpose of benefiting the butterfly, then you have to accept the fact that it's going to get eaten. We planted some blue violets in here. Violets are the host plant for fritillary butterflies, which we have 2 species of here at Smith's Woods. And fritillaries will lay their eggs on the leaves of violet. So that's why we planted them here in the shade of the host plant garden, since they are more shade loving. And we also have some common milkweeds as well, which of course the monarchs use. So there's 3 different species of host plants, or I should say 3 different types of plants in here that attract 3 different species of butterfly caterpillars. So we planted some other trees that are host plants for butterflies, and we didn't want to do that. We didn't want to put them in near the middle of the garden, because shade in a butterfly garden generally isn't good. Most of the time butterflies and other pollinators need open sun, and so do the flowers. They're all full sun type plants. So we planted the host plants that were trees and shrubs on the outer edge of the garden. So first we're going to look at ironwood, which is a tree that grows very well here at Smith's Woods. Ironwood is also known as hornbeam or musclewood, and it's in the birch family. This particular species is a host plant for the tiger swallowtail and the striped hairstreak. The seeds that this tree produces are also a good source of food for small animals. So it's a really beneficial tree. So that's the ironwood. This is hackberry. This is a brand new addition to our butterfly garden in 2020. Hackberry is a type of small tree that's a host plant for lots of different kinds of butterflies, including the hackberry emperor, the tawny emperor, the American snout, the question mark, and the mourning cloak. So these are all really neat butterflies that we have around here. In fact, last year we started seeing the American snout. We hadn't really seen it at all in previous years, so that particular species is expanding its range north. And so I purposely selected hackberry since it's a host plant for all of these different species. And the fruits that this tree will eventually produce are also good for birds. And this particular shrub is known as winged sumac. It's a native shrub. It's not poisonous. Winged sumac is a fantastic shrub for many reasons. It eventually produces a huge bloom that attracts enormous amounts of pollinators with bright sort of yellow flowers in clusters. So it's a nectar plant, but it's also a host plant for the red-banded hairstreak, which is relatively common here in Burlington County. And as this shrub matures, it produces little red fruits that are a very useful source of nutrition for migratory birds in the fall. So all of the pollinators that we have here are pretty much insects, right? We have butterflies, moths, bees, wasps, beetles, flies. These are all insect pollinators. The only non-insect pollinator we have here is the ruby-throated hummingbird. And the ruby-throated hummingbird is attracted to a flower that has a long tube that's bright color and has no scent, since birds don't really have a sense of smell. They're attracted to a different type of flower. And so the trumpet honeysuckle, or coral honeysuckle, is a native species that is very much attracting the hummingbird. The hummingbird loves red and has this really long tube which perfectly fits its long beak. The nectar is held at the back of that tube, and every day the hummingbird will come and drink the nectar from the flowers. So the trumpet honeysuckle, also known as coral honeysuckle, is the native species that we recommend planting for hummingbirds. The other honeysuckles are not native, and they can be extremely invasive, take over many other plants, and strangle the trees. We don't want those varieties. This is the safe variety. So again, the purpose of this garden was to plant species that are good for nectar and pollen for our native pollinators. There are a lot of flowers out there that are easy to purchase at various garden stores, mostly annuals like petunias, and in the spring daffodils, tulips, begonias, impatiens. All of those kinds of flowers are very pretty, but they've been modified so much that they don't have nectar or pollen. So they provide nothing for our native pollinators. So those would not be a good choice here in our garden. The only annual that we do plant here is the marigold. And the reason why we do that is not for nectar or pollen, but because the marigolds actually deter the aphids that attack the milkweed. And so if we look in the garden, we'll see that the marigolds are planted among the milkweeds as a deterrent to the aphids. So landscaping with native plants in your yard can really help our native pollinators. And we want to try to use native plants whenever possible, as they attract and help a lot more of our insects and birds than non-native ones do. So here in the Smith's Woods Butterfly Garden, we've seen examples of how offering food to all the different parts of a butterfly's life cycle and habitat can really help our species that are, for the most part, declining throughout this area and throughout the country. Our native pollinators are declining due to many factors, mostly loss of habitat, losing their nectar and host plants, pesticide poisoning, using herbicides like Roundup, killing off the plants they need to either feed on or lay their eggs on. Diseases brought in from other places that are transferred from bees that are used in pollination. For instance, in greenhouses, those diseases are then spread to our native bees that don't have resistance. Climate change is forcing many other kinds of species to encroach on our native pollinators' habitat, and the invasive species are crowding out the plants that they need for survival. So there's a lot of factors that are involved with the decline of our native pollinators. So if we can help in some way, the best way to do that is to plant the things they need. And so hopefully you got some good information in this video that would help understand the best plants to use to attract a wide array of pollinators to your yard. And this is National Pollinator Week coming up, so it's the time when we focus on learning more about these critical creatures that do so much, without which we would not be able to have our food supply would be severely limited, and over 80% of the plants in the natural world require the help of an animal pollinator. So we need to take this particular situation seriously when it comes to the decline of our native pollinators, and do whatever we can to help them try to recover. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you at the Butterfly Garden soon. Thanks.